Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Robert Dijari from Temple University. I'm extremely happy that thanks to Professor Mark, who is here, we're having Watanabe-san, who will enlighten us on Japanese soft power, in particular in Singapore. So after his presentation introduction, Professor Mark will make a few comments and suggestions. Maybe even criticism, because we try to have a real discussant. I mean, I've often been to Japanese universities where the discussant summarizes what the presenter has said, in case you were sleeping during the main presentation. But we try to be a little different. So without further ado, Watanabe-san?
While we prepare the slides, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Shunpei Watanabe. I am currently a dual-degree student at the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo, as well as in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy of National University of Singapore. And I have just come back from Singapore yesterday. I miss Singapore now very much. And I'd like to talk about Japan's soft power in Singapore-Japan interstate relations. And this research project was something called policy analysis exercise. It's like a graduation project of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And it's rather policy-oriented project, but I'd like to take some academic touch on that. And okay, here we go. And so, first, I'm going to briefly talk about what soft power is a bit and touch upon the methodology and discuss the results I got in the data collection, then further remarks on Japanese foreign policy in the future. So, power. Yeah, we need power. Why do we need power? And Japan so most of the Japanese challenges today require cooperation from other nations, whether it's security or economy or environment and various other issues. It just cannot be done unilaterally, and that's why we need to seek power. And so how do we get that kind of cooperation with our power? And there are thinkable ways to have power, have influence over other states. We can force other people, point a gun on your head, then tell them what to do. But it's not gonna happen to Japan. And another way for us to do is to, I pay you, so do us a favor, thank you very much, kind of thing. And that is not gonna have that's possible. However, it's costly, but it does not create a long-term relationship. And most of the challenges we face today cannot be solved just by money. So we gotta think otherwise. Then here we go. So people think people call soft power in a way by attraction, and that is Joseph Nye model, but it's not unique to him. The name I'm thinking of his name all day long, but so this Robert Baldwin or Professor Baldwin wrote a book called Three Faces of Power, and he had three forms of power. First one was coercion, second one was transaction, and the third one he calls it integration, and in his hippie moment he calls it love. And so this is not unique to Joseph Nye models. And so the form of soft power is that a country with same values as Japan can cooperate with Japan. A country with a population who are in love with Japanese culture, etc., can gain support for their foreign policy, and country that views Japan as moral authority likely to accept Japanese proposal in many ways. And this is Joseph Nye's model, and I looked at Japanese soft power in three ways, and the culture as often discussed in the context of Japanese soft power, which I'm not going to do too much today. Political values and ideology and foreign policy, these latter two are the main components of discussion today. And so I have to go about think about the questions. And first, and how do we know about soft power? Speaking of the nature of power, the power that I project I cannot perceive it, but it doesn't work on me. So I have to figure it out, and then I have to explore what is, but it's being the power for Japan, and what are the challenges and negative factors in the strings. So, I have to think about how to go about this. And when you like me, I never know why you like me because I'm not you. If you hate me, I never know why you hate me because I'm not you anyway. And I love this saying, if you assume you make ass of you and me. My Canadian friends told me that I guess it's globally accepted, but anyway, this is what's happening to Japanese soft power policy today. Well, if you go onto the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, they talk about popular culture, kawaii, ambassador, and so on. It's important, and that certainly is soft power, but is that the only thing? And there are other things, and to figure that out, I have to go about and ask questions. So I did interviews with diplomats, government officials, and since the primary focus was interstate relations, and I wanted to do culture a lot, but it simply was not quite possible. And the cuisine, the movies, fashion, they're important. But I couldn't think about a way to explore Japanese pornography's influence over Singapore, because it certainly is important, and they all medieval men as well. They have to talk about it sometimes. It's on the record. Yeah. Anyway, so okay.
We can edit it afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
If you want.
Okay. Yeah.
We can cut the.
All right.
Moral parts of it.
And so, all right, great. Yeah. Okay, these are the interviewees, and this gentleman is Ambassador Kesabatani. He was the first chairman of WTO meeting. Ambassador Tomiko, he was ambassador to Japan. He's still ambassador at large, and he even got a medal awarded by our Imperial Majesty Emperor. And this gentleman, his name is Mr. Peter Ho. He served as a permanent Secretary of Defense and Foreign Affairs, and he was the head of civil servant until 2 years ago. I guess it's the counterpart of Naika Kambo Shokai. And this guy, Kisho Magumari, the dean of our school and the permanent secretary, and his highlight was his term in the Security Council. This gentleman, very not too known, but a very important person. He served in, his name is Mr. Jeffrey Yu. He served in WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, for quite a bit. Also served in Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a long time. And he helped me a lot being appointment to go about to these important people. And this gentleman, he's actually Filipino. Does anybody recognize him? Yes. And he's Mr. Rodolfo Severino. He was a former Secretary General of ASEAN, currently doing a research work in Singapore. And Singapore, since Singapore treats ASEAN as a very important thing, I had to get some ASEAN perspective as well. And this last guy, and this is me, and this is a former Foreign Minister of Singapore, Mr. Giorgio. And first of all, the great thing about these people is that they're approachable, they're accessible, and they welcome young people, even me. And so this kind of attitude is one feature of Singaporean government. And yes, the 3 points I told you, and also the hard power component. And soft power should not be a policy goal by itself. Yes, and since Joseph Nye and also Hillary Clinton discussed the smart power concept of smart power, good combination of soft power and hard power, and that's what we are looking at. So I have to discuss hard power as well, and also showing a good practice in how they use hard power makes them a sense of credible government, a good governance, and that can be a very important soft power asset. So I asked questions about hard power as well. Okay, the culture is very successful, and it's just everywhere. You can't believe you're in Singapore when you're in Singapore, when you see a lot of Japanese culture. And Singapore even helped Japan establish Japan Creative Center. It's kind of like a museum to promote Japanese culture in Singapore. However, the popular culture, the drama, and animated movies, and so on, they're subject to competition, namely South Korea and China today. So Japan is not the only one who is taking advantage of it. And in terms of consumer goods, it's just so successful that people think it's natural to have Japanese products. So they don't see Japan in the consumer products anyways. They take them for granted. Just as you do not appreciate the United States whenever you eat Big Mac, they don't see Japan when they see Japanese product there. And actually, we didn't. I like Big Mac, by the way. And they didn't talk too much about culture since it was interstate relations. So it certainly wasn't even the most important things. The important things are politics and the policies. You know, when it comes to political values, Japan doesn't really have a political value that they perceive. And what they're looking at is how the politicians do. And certainly having a lot of prime ministers is a negative factor. And lack of leadership, lack of coherence in the government and the politics is really frustrating them. But on the other hand, a manageable government with lots of prime ministers can be an asset of soft power, because the leaders change a lot, but the government is still working hard. So this can be something we can explore. And social values and norms that they saw during and after the time disaster show tremendous, it's quite a strength that Japan has. However, Singapore sees it with sympathy, and Mr. Peter Ho said that sympathy does not always translate into influence, so we have to, you cannot overvalue this in this sense. And the problem is often the transparency. It's just hard to tell what Japan is thinking. It's just hard to tell what Japan is doing. And quite a bit of the political transaction happen behind the scenes. And you know, and actually, Dean Magma just mentioned Honne and Tatema in his accent, and certainly it's evident even with Singapore. And another thing is that it's okay, Mr. Jeffrey, you said it's okay to have mistakes, it's okay to share the pain and so on. You know, he mentioned Barack Obama in this context. We can criticize Barack Obama, we can know why he's bad and good. So in the end, we can forgive him, so we can like him in the end. However, Japanese prime minister, they're so nice that they want to be perfect all the time, so they cannot show their weakness, they cannot show their mistakes, so we cannot forgive them. So this kind of sense is creating lack of sincerity, and it's interesting thing. But you know, this is really what makes relationship, I perceive. And okay, when it comes to the foreign policy, the strengths come from the foreign aid and the JICA programs. The Fukuda Doctrine, especially relatively senior diplomats still remember 1977 Manila speech. And to be specific, the strengths of Japanese foreign policy come from the attitude, the distinctive nature of the foreign aid program. This was introduced by Ambassador Kesabapani, and he worked extensively with JICA, and he really liked the sharing, attitude of sharing experience and working together instead of I pay you, so do as I say, which is called Washington Consensus. That makes Japan a distinctive donor state. However, today Japan faces challenges, and Singapore at least cannot perceive a long-term coherent strategy, and they see the competition among the ministries as a problem. They just can't figure out who to listen to when they face Tokyo. And when I talked to the one of diplomats from Japan, he recalled this moment of birth of APEC. Perhaps many of you know, but I'd like to talk about this a bit. So, so it was a Metis, Japanese Metis initiative, but they went to Australian Foreign Ministry and they put that as Australian proposal bypassing Japanese Foreign Ministry. So this kind of competition, this kind of tension among the ministry is making the coordination among the government very difficult. And simply the information about Japanese foreign policy is not being shared very well. And this is another problem of transparency. Ambassador Severino mentioned this. Japan is actually doing a very good job, and he cited the project in Mekong River region. However, it's just not known, and this actually comes from Japanese mentality. So we don't show off, and nobody likes someone who shows off. We know about this, and this one official from JICA told me this expression. I just bloody difficult to translate. Can anybody help me translate this very well? So you okay? So it's like you walk on something very hard, and and tackling the thing, and my back tells you how hard I'm walking. It's just not conveyed by the words. That the attitude, the diligence, that's unspoken feeling gives me the sense of diligence, but it's so Japanese, isn't it? I think, and it's good to have such value, but if it's not conveyed, maybe we gotta think differently. And when it comes to hard power, and we talked about a lot of hard power things, and I'd like to talk about two things here, and the most important thing seems to be what to do with the United States. Kishore Mahbubani said, nobody respects followers, we respect leaders. And even Japan became great. Japan didn't take leadership, and the relationship is perceived to be on equal basis still. And I guess this is what United States would want as well. Japan being more provocative and more no. Okay, that's a discussion point. Okay, so what to do with US? So take leadership, take its own position. That is going to be the challenge for Japan when it comes to showing a leadership. And another hard power aspect is what Japan did in the Pacific War. In 1941, Japanese army entered Singapore. There wasn't much British force left, so Japan pretty much had a free hand, but did quite a bit of nasty things. Slaughtered the civilians, which is the worst thing an army can do. But thanks to the Japanese contribution to Singapore, and thanks to the general Singaporean population, there is not much hatred about this. However, the problem is that the Japanese side, we Japanese don't have a consensus about what we did in the war. And even though the government makes a speech, it's not conveyed well, or it doesn't stay very long. Certainly the Murayama speech of 1995 has faded away. So, and also, this is also a problem for Japanese side as well, in the sense that Japanese are also traumatized by the memory of the war. And this Japanese diplomat told me that the leadership in Asia has been taboo since the end of the World War II. Because Pacific War was one way Japan tried to show a leadership, which turned out to be a total disaster. And since then, it became very difficult to talk about Japanese leadership. And many of the interviewees told me that Japan has to free itself from the history, and this is still relevant. And this is and another hard part, not quite hard, but another policy level discussion was that this is quite particular to Singapore, I guess, but it's the thing of immigration. So Singapore has a lot of immigrants, and out of 5 million people, 1.6 million people are not citizens. So Singapore always welcomes foreigners, and they even treat foreigners better than their own nationals. That creates another problem. But for such a country, Japan not having large number of immigrants is actually making a sense of rejection. And this word, the foreigners are tolerated in Japan, but they're not welcomed. So this kind of sense is what Singapore perceive in Japanese immigration or non-immigration policy. And this is certainly what we can discuss further on its own light. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is the mentality. So Ambassador, it was Tommy Ko, who served in Japan, quite knowledgeable about Japan, but he still thinks, and I do think that Japanese people are inward looking, not reaching out to the rest of the world. And another thing is still looking at Europe. This was quite just said by Kishore Mahbani, and that even after Japan became number one, Japan is still looking at Europe and the United States, and it's still doing so, and looking down upon Asia, which is contrary to the Fukuda doctrine spirit. And Mahbani always said that if you want to see tomorrow, you go to Paris. If you want to see today, you go to New York. If you want to go to see tomorrow, yeah, now you go to Singapore. And Asia is doing well. They have incredible people, but Japan is still looking down upon Southeast Asia. Some of us are not, but surely some of us are looking down upon Southeast Asia. And this is quite evident from Kishore Mahbani wrote this in his essay that Ambassador Jakarta going to London is considered to be a promotion. It's still certainly true, and although Europe is sinking down, well, I hope they rise again. And Japan can take leadership. That's what they always say. And Singapore would welcome Japanese leadership in the region. However, so in the overall influence of Japanese soft power in Singapore is not very strong. I would say weak, to be honest. However, Singapore still supports Japan very strongly, but Japan is not engaged in Southeast Asia or Singapore very much. And why is that? Why is Singapore supporting Japan, although Japan is not considered to be doing well? And that was the last question I wanted to answer. And
2 or 3 minutes.
okay. And this, there's an ambivalence between how Japan sees and how Singapore sees Japan. For Singapore, Japan is Japan. But for Japan, Singapore is one of the Southeast Asian countries, and maybe I can talk about the example later. But so Singapore is a small country in terms of the land and population. However, Singapore's GDP is the third biggest among ASEAN countries. So, we can't have Singapore as the center of ASEAN, just like Brussels of Europe, because Brussels is small, and French and Germans and the Brits are big. But Singapore is small, but it's big too. So Japan-Singapore relations takes place in this complexity of regional politics. And after all, Singapore is actually still small, so a small country cannot afford to lose a friend. So this is what's happening now. And in conclusion, so the first thing that I have to remember is that Japan cannot know what Japan's soft power is without interactive manner to explore it. So we gotta go ask, and that I guess that is what diplomacy is. And the coordination among the politics, among the ministries, among everyone is essential in projecting soft power effectively. And after all, the soft power for Singapore diplomats are not about culture, not about sushi and all that. It's about how Japan performs with its hard power asset, which creates a sense of credibility among them. And the last thing is that, for Japan to be truly influential in Asia, it has to be more engaged, and that is probably going the moment we're waiting for. In the end, Foreign Minister George Yeo told me that Japan will have to be more serious with Asia, and that's when it becomes truly influential. So I guess I spread many points, and I take question, comments later on, and yeah, that's about it for now.
I don't think Robert's going to introduce me. So.
You need no introduction. You can self-introduce.
He's going to have to stand up later and answer questions, but I want to make a couple of comments sort of in this whole range of soft power that I think is really interesting for a couple of different reasons. One, when I was a young graduate student and was first introduced to the idea of cultural hegemony, some of the same ideas came out. The idea of, for example, the American influence in Japan. And I come to Japan and I find out that quite a few Japanese are nervous that the Americans are too influential in Japan. You know, we don't want to become Americans, which I agreed with because I didn't want Japan to become America. I had left America and come to Japan, which I thought was a good idea. But this has become quite a bit more sophisticated an idea, and it's there's just some bits I want to try and push. But one observation, Japan's longest alliance in history is with the United States since 1952. So literally every day, a new record is set of Japan's formal alliance with another country. Now, this is an interesting thing. You know, Japan simply, in history, I teach Japanese history, I should mention. Japan does not play well with others. Japan has its own sense of identity and its own strength, which I think is good. It's important, it's useful. But the problem is exactly the point that Watanabe-san was talking about. If Japan is going to engage with Southeast Asian nations, if Japan is going to engage with the United States, which I'm going to get to in a minute, but Southeast Asian too, Japan has to play well with others. There has to be a real interest in going outside of Japanese borders and going to Singapore, going to Hong Kong, going to Australia. And I don't mean for just honeymoons. I think honeymoons are fine. I think Guam has done very well. Hawaii has certainly done very well for years. But this is not the main point of the exercise. Bit by bit, I think Japan is moving away from its borders. I think more and more Japanese business people are to be found seriously engaging with other societies, particularly in Southeast Asia and East Asia. But it's been a very slow and agonizing process. In the times that I've been involved in looking at Japan, yes, statistically you've increased the number of businessmen, but you've decreased the number of Japanese students who are going overseas to study. So it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think there's also a very interesting parallel that I just want to sort of suggest. You know, some of you know my work in Japan tends to be mostly with rural Japan. I actually started out as an urban anthropologist. Did my original field work in Sapporo, did work in Kyoto. But the last couple of decades, I've been working mostly in rural Tohoku. And one of the things I find very interesting, and endlessly interesting, I should say, about Japan, is the unthinking influence of Tokyo, the unthinking dominance of Tokyo in Japanese culture. And this is everything from economic systems to venture capital to fashions like loose socks. Why loose socks start in one place and then radiate out across Japan. And this is the same idea of soft power. You can talk about the soft power of Tokyo, or you can talk about cultural hegemony, basically talk about the same kinds of thing. And this is even to the detriment, I would argue, if I'm getting serious about it, to most of Japan. Most of rural Japan is damaged by this enormous magnet or black hole, if you wish, of Tokyo. And even if you remember the famous Tanaka proposal to spread Tokyo out, which I'm really glad didn't happen, because what would have happened if Tanaka had been able to do that is Tokyo would have gotten even stronger. You would have had a giant Tokyo from whatever Shizuoka to Fukushima would have all been Tokyo, which is a really scary thought. Tokyo's very scary in its own right. Having said that, I think that the point that I would like to add in here is this, actually his last line, Watanabe-san's last line. I think that the idea of Japan becoming more serious about actually international stuff is really critical. And how you do that, I have no real idea. I just mentioned the fact that there are fewer Japanese students going overseas to go to study, which I see as negative. Another negative thing I see, and back to the point made about Japan-American relationships, which are quite different than Japanese-Southeast Asian relationships. Japan has to deal with learn to deal with the United States as an equal. The United States also has problems here, but I'm not going to touch that. Japan, and I disagree with you that the United States would like Japan to show leadership. Actually, I think many Americans would like Japan to shut up and do what they're told. You know, our Marines go here, you do that. But aside from what the Americans may think, the crucial part, I think, from a Japanese point of view, is to accept the idea that Japan is what, the third largest economy, fourth largest economy, depending on how you define it. That doesn't put it so far behind the biggest economy. It's not like 1946. The world has changed a lot in my lifetime, which I find fascinating. And Japan has to make the adjustment. The analogy I use, and this may tick somebody off, is siblings. When you're growing up, your younger brother is obviously your younger brother. A 6-year-old is much younger than a 10-year-old. On the other hand, I happen to have a brother that's 4 years old. I have 3 brothers, but one of them's 4 years older than I am. And I remember being 6, and the 10-year-old brother, he was one of the big boys. Well, now he's 70, and I'm 66. And there's not that much difference. And I certainly don't give him any seniority. Japan has to make that adjustment. And I think Japan has it. I think that's one of the problems, I think, with the Japanese prime ministers, virtually all of them, which I think is a great point. This, the idea of the Japanese, playing musical chairs with the prime minister makes it very difficult for Japan to deal with the rest of the world, and very difficult for the rest of the world to deal with Japan. They don't know which Japan you're dealing with. And actually, I think that the change to the Democratic Socialist Japan Democratic Party from the LDP was less of a shock to Japan, to the United States, for example, than the election of Barack Obama was to Japan. Watching Japan try to deal with a black Democrat as president was, I have to admit, somewhat humorous, because they had no clue. I think the Gainu Show and various other groups were struggling like crazy to deal with this. In any case, I want to keep this very short, because I want to have you have chances to go after Watanabe-kun. But I think this is really one of the crucial points that was made, and I think it's a very good one. Now, one more point I want to make, just in the interest of full disclosure. Robert blamed or credited me with bringing Watanabe-kun to this group. Watanabe-kun, when he was a freshman at Tsukuba, was in my class. And there's a very interesting shift in relationship from the time that you were 18 and in the class. He then went to the University of Utrecht for a year, graduated from Tsukuba, went to Todai, goes to Singapore, comes back to Todai, and now is giving a talk here. He's also doing a chapter in a book that I'm co-editing, or I'm editing, that's on the impact of international education on Japan, on local areas in Japan. And the chapter he's working on, but has not yet given me the draft of, is on the impact on students. At Tsukuba, which is a, quote, great international university, his argument, which I think is very good, is that the impact of internationalization, and this is in the College of International Studies, is almost zero. Almost nothing. The students who come in are preordained for that, they go through 4 years, virtually no change, they leave. Which I think is a very interesting perspective, and I hope he gets it done fairly soon. Now that you're back from Singapore, I can harass you with short rant.
Okay, thank you. Now Q&A. Thank you very much. I'll make a few. I want to say a few things because I have the advantage of chairing this meeting. Good. Thanks
so much. I promise. Thank you very much, Watanabe-san. And thank you very much, John, for bringing Watanabe-san. One way we try to make this group good is we try to rejuvenate the cadres. In other words, to bring new and younger speakers. Yeah. So thank you. I'd like to make just a few comments because I'm very interested in this issue. I think one, the follower and leader. It was interesting. It came from a Singaporean official because in some ways Singapore is this amazing model of follower. Because there's, I think, almost no post-colonial society that said, we will follow what the colonizing power did. We will continue to use English. We will basically make the place even more British than it was under the Brits. And in that sense, it's very impressive. Or even in the military field. I mean, they built a naval base which is big enough for an aircraft carrier. Now, given which is basically a US Navy aircraft carrier. So there's a lot of following, which is not bad. And I think, in terms of alliances, the truth is no alliance is an alliance of equals. And the Westphalian concepts that we have in international relations say that all states are equal, but the fact is, when, for example, the President of the United States meets the Prime Minister of Singapore, says we're all equal, whatever, well, no, there's a slight size difference. And actually, most alliances that have been effective have been alliances where one country towers over the others. Field Marshal Foch, when he was Allied Commander-in-Chief during World War I, said that suddenly he had lost a lot of respect for Napoleon because Napoleon fought against a coalition.
And it was interesting. It was a coalition where there was no leader until at the end, really, the Brits took over. And that's one reason why it took so long to get rid of Napoleon. So the truth is, everybody says they want an equal relationship, but it's structurally impossible. And also it's the last thing which the Japanese government wants at this point. The United States said, look, yeah, we're equal, 50-50. This isn't the plan. I think you were very, very good in pointing out that popular culture is not the core of soft power. It's not because you eat at McDonald's that you suddenly support American foreign policy. You can like sushi and not necessarily be a friend of Japan. I think the point about immigration was very important. I mean, one way in which Japan is very much missing an opportunity for soft power is to bring in more immigrants. Because if you bring in more immigrants, there you actually contribute to not only spreading out your culture, but you become very important. Because if you think of a country like the Philippines, where indirectly the United States and Japan on one hand and China are competing, if there were 2 or 3 million Filipinos working in Japan, Japan would be extraordinarily important to the Philippines. So that's a way of both having hard and soft power. I think you were very good also on pointing out that Japan still looks to the West. But I think that's not unique. I think that's the case of every Asian society. I think it's even the case of China, for example. And that makes sense, because it is the West that brought modernity to East Asia, and to some extent continues to do so. I mean, you see the Chinese Communist Party is an interesting example. It is politically very anti-Western. It has become culturally anti-Western. But if you ask the Chinese leaders where are they sending their kids to school, they're sending them to the US. There was this great quote, I think it was Financial Times, where they said that it's been argued in China that you can't have the meetings of the Central Committee of the Communist Party on the same day as the Parents' Day at Harvard, because all the parents are in Cambridge, Mass, taking care of their children. So it was very good. And I think in the end, what I would conclude, you mentioned cultural hegemony, John. I think if you want to understand soft power, it's probably better to read Gramsci than Joe Nye. He probably has more to say about cultural hegemony and what it really means to influence people than Nye does. But thanks again, and now we'll have our Q&A session. Yes.
I think it is.
My name is Toshisudo, businessman, and it's quite understandable that Japan is not so serious about Singapore. But talking about, is this simply because Japan is looking down Singapore as well as other ASEAN countries? It seems to me that when we talk about Asia, we tend to look at China and Korea first. These countries are close, and also we have delicate and sensitive issues with these countries. And particularly when we try to get stronger tie with the ASEAN countries, we may have a backlash from these countries. That's why we cannot take a strong leadership. Or still, it seems that China or Korea, the existence of these countries may impact the relationship with the ASEAN countries. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we can't really talk about purely bilateral relationship. I mean, any international relation takes place in bilateral, regional, and global scale. And I think you do have a great point, but to be honest, Japan going forward to Southeast Asia, I mean, if it does well, it's not going to affect the relationship with China and South Korea. And first, we can have a few leaders instead of one leader. And before Japan does anything with Asia seriously, I mean, there are problems that we have to solve, namely the issue of the war. What we did in the war, it's still casting a dark shadow on Japanese diplomacy, and we have to do that. I guess there's no way we can avoid that. So if we go through that, and also, I don't think it's zero sum. I think there's a way to cope the interest, then move forward, and yeah, but so yeah. Do you think it's gonna?
Well, yeah. I understand that Japan can do something directly to Singapore or other ASEAN countries, as they pointed out, and Japan can change by ourselves. But yeah, I just wondered if this has an impact.
Okay, great.
My name is Sato, small business owner. I'm very impressed by your wonderful performance today, as if I am hearing somebody from Singapore was talking about the great thing about Singapore. The fundamental difference between here and Singapore is Singapore started with the strategist, the great strategist Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who created hard power first, and the greatest brain power that imported the highly sophisticated computer in 1990. And that would make the tremendous difference to come for the decade that between 1990 and 2000, I was having the greatest opportunity visiting Singapore as a businessman. I mean, I was there probably 5 or 6 times a year. And the two things I found. The one was that they speak, or they spoke at the time, already a beautiful English, and when did they write or wrote? Tremendous difference I found. Therefore, that's not the field. The battlefield was theirs, not mine. In other words, no matter how I put my effort, I can't catch up to them. That's applied to the entire scenario of the Japanese government, whatever. They do better jobs in English, which is the international communication language, so that the Japanese government agencies, no matter who they are, they try to avoid the contact with Singapore, not with other Asian, Southeast Asian countries. That's my observation. The number two is that you are the first one, the new generation, who can understand soft power and hard power. You are the first one speaking English as if you can live in Singapore, which is wonderful. And you just amazed me that you are from Tokyo University. Why you didn't go to the government and Ministry of Foreign Affairs? You could get the better position with a PhD title or honorary PhD title from Harvard because you are sent by the government. So what is your ultimate goal that you are going to accomplish? This is a real question.
I take any job offer tonight. Yeah, sure. As the first point, yeah, I mean, Singapore is strong in its language, although, I mean, they have distinct accent, say la every time they finish a sentence, and you know, many, and it's very cute. It's spoken by a cute person, by the way. And also, what I realized was that they're good at talking in English to people who don't speak English. Because majority of the population don't speak that good English, actually. The grammars are somewhat unique in its own. And so, yeah, and it's the Singapore government is certainly creative. And they don't really have a limitation. I mean, they call it pragmatists, that they have this courage or this atmosphere to, okay, let's just do it, do it kind of mentality. They still have that. So there are always new enterprises that are coming out in Singapore, and that's their strength. Although it might change in the coming years, we can see from the election results and gaining power of the opposition party. And I think it was great for me to be there this time while the People's Action Party, PAP, is still strong and Lee Kuan Yew is still alive. And when the big guy goes, we never know actually. So that's the situation. So in 5 years, it can be a total different country. But now, this is like the peaking point of Singapore, and I appreciate that opportunity. But as to the second point, yeah, I'd love to work for Singaporean government if I had a chance to, and yeah.
Well, you've also talked about going to MIT.
Yes. So actually, I mean, this this piece and other things I'm working on is a part of one big picture. And in the end, I'd like to do something for my country as well, of course. And this country is in crisis, in my understanding. But so we need an effective person to facilitate a dialogue, a discussion among everyone. We have to make tough decisions, and I don't think it can be done in the way we have done before. So my dream job will be to be a facilitator for this national debate for a few things: energy and the relationship with the United States. I think we gotta talk. I mean, we had national fight about Japan-U.S. alliance, but no more. So I don't want a riot anymore, but we need to talk about it, and there has to be someone who can facilitate the process. And I would like to be the facilitator, as I facilitated many things in Singapore.
Join Hashimoto Club. Ishin no Club.
By the way, I cannot run for any political position given my age at the moment. So I have to be 25 to run for the lower house, right? And I don't have that qualification
How
yet.
old are you, sir?
23 years old right now, and okay. Okay, so I still have time to think about it too. So and I never exclude any options. Thank you. And any other points, comments? Yes, yes, sir.
My name is Petro Sugimoto, and I'm a medical cap and question. Thank you for your great presentation, and I want to ask you some questions. One question. Usually, when I say business relations between two countries, promote, countries' relationship, or cities' relationship, or like the title, or more engagement with your friends of Japanese soft power. In Asian countries, for example, Japan want to investigate China. That's why I say many Japanese people are interested in China, although there are some criticism. However, Singapore is a very direct country, but very small country. So we are very interested in Singapore, but not so serious, actually. So, what do you think is important to promote, two countries' relationship and, inspire, people's interest in Singapore?
Right now, the Japan-Singapore relationship is pretty much occupied by economic relationship, and just as Japan-Singapore FTA was the first one for Japan, and many of the important substance of the embassy there is done by a METI attaché there, and it's certainly true. But in even the business transaction, how Japanese businessmen and the government engages with Singapore really creates a sense of soft power or even negative impact soft power. What Japanese people, most of them do is that to fly in with Japan Airlines or ANA and stay in Japanese hotel, dine at Japanese restaurants, and don't engage so much with the locals. And so lack of deep human engagement in any type of relationship between Japan and Singapore, that has been pointed out by some interviewees. So Japan does things in mechanical way, institutional way, which is a strength. No matter who is in charge, we can get things going. But diplomacy is, as far as I can tell from those people, is very interpersonal as well as international. So we need that even in business. And importance of Singapore, importance of having more influence in Singapore is first ASEAN, since Singapore is very small, and surrounded by potentially hostile nations, Malaysia, Indonesia. Singapore has to have a good international environment and good relationship with the rest of the neighbor, and also in order for Singapore to enhance its economic prosperity, which is peaking, and they're trying to figure out what the next jump, and the regional integration is a key for them. So if we invest in Singapore, that will spread out in Southeast Asia. And the classic importance of Singapore is its geographical competence. You know, Lee Kuan Yew says, "Oh, Singapore was so poor, there was nothing much." You know, it's certainly untrue for me. First, they have a huge Chinese population, businessmen, who are doing business, doing trade in the region. So the peace and stability of that region is certainly an interest to Japan. If you go to Sentosa Island, it's a failed resort in Singapore. Nice beach, but what you can see is more tankers than beautiful ladies. So if you fly into Changi Airport, what you see below is countless number of vessels, and that maritime transport interest and fighting piracy over there, that's important as well. So there are these two strategic importance, and also the Singapore is the only developed country in the region. And what Japan is doing now is having a partnership. It's called Japan-Singapore Partnership Program for 21st Century. It's about making foreign aid to the third party by Japan and Singapore together. And since the role of ODA will be decreasing as the neighboring countries get richer, Japan has to be creative in making development aid and in the region. So in that sense, Singapore is a very important partner, and in that sense, diplomatic relationship is crucial. Yes.
Such thing is might promote relationship with two countries, but I think there is a limitation. Either as a business or culture, maybe people want to stay in that country for a long time, but sightseeing a very short time, and
I do it.
trigger.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. And the business interest in Singapore is growing. For example, the number of MBA students at National University of Singapore has jumped. Anyway, so it's jumping, like multiplies over the time. So certainly people are finding more interest in Singapore, and Japanese businessmen is viewing Singapore. They respect Singapore instead of looking down upon them. So creative part is yes, indeed coming from the business people as well. I guess, and then perhaps coordination with business people and the government and people like us might create a strategic and important and deep relationship with them. Yeah.
I'm Hiroshima Go from Hosei University Institute of Okinawan Studies. And I'm very happy to hear you today because Singapore lacked many things to start, but still they try to overcome. And so they have very clear strategy, and they stuck to it. And so I admire Singapore a lot. And I met quite a few Singaporean diplomats here in Tokyo, and I talked to them, and they, quite a few of them spoke very good Japanese, and also Chinese and English, and so they're trying quite a few of them. And then they're quite different from other Asian countries, as you said, because they're very rich and developed and so on. But they have something we lack, Japanese lack, Japanese don't have, and that's the strategy, and then leadership. and then the values and so forth are not shared now by leaders and potential leaders and so forth. And I expected quite a bit on the BPJ, Democratic Party of Japan, but I'm not really satisfied at all. And but so my question is that how, well, what kind of things Japan can do from now on? Not only with Singapore, but Singapore is not a model, some people say, but still I think that, for instance, in the case of Okinawa, it's a very small island, and so probably, well, Singapore is partly at the moment for Okinawa and so forth. But for the whole Japan, things would be quite different. So what can Japan do? Following other countries' strategies and so forth.
I would say decentralization. Yeah. Singapore is strong because it's small. Singapore can make strategy, can have consensus because it's small. When I went for interview with Mr. Peter Ho, I was supposed to go to Prime Minister's office, Naikaku, and the building was the Treasury, Ministry of Finance, and when it comes to foreign service, Singapore does not have embassy anywhere in Latin America. No, it doesn't. And then they're going to set up a new one in Brazil. It's going to be the first one. And they have only an embassy in Washington, D.C. and a representative for UN in New York. And the New York office, that's the consular relation with Mexico and Canada. That's how small Singapore is. Singapore is small, but so it doesn't have capacity, but they can make one piece one team very strong. That's what still Lee Kuan Yew says. There was a speech I attended with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and there was a question saying that, can we have two-party system? He said, Singapore is good at having one good team. Yeah. Yeah? Huh?
One good team.
Yeah, his team. So, yeah. And Japan, on the other hand, is huge, isn't it? I mean, looking at Japan from Singapore is just big. But the most of the power of Japan is located in a place which is as big as Singapore,
Okay.
and controlling everything. And Japan cannot. Living in Tokyo forever. Go to good high school, go to Todai, be an official. I mean, it's real. Even for me, it is very difficult to realize and feel the size of Japan, and the asset we have lies in rural area of Japan, and it's not about Tokyo anymore. And Tokyo-sized government ruling the entire Japan, it's not gonna work that way. So if we want to have a strong team, we have to have more teams, and it has to be in many places. That's what I would say. Yes.
I have a question.
Hi, Meg Nakano. I work in a multinational company, offices in over 55 different countries. And the Singapore office is about 1/3 of my overseas contact. I'm back and forth with them all the time. The others are a little bit in Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, and London. We bring in families and send them out. It's relocations. I have noticed that, number one, Japan looks inward as a nation because in terms of the people, there are more people who are inward looking in Japan than in other countries. Singapore, they're outward looking people, therefore an outward looking country. But the fit between managers, people, Singaporeans working in Japanese companies in Japan is really, really is there any way you could get a government program not to trade back and forth academics or students, but to get middle managers, strategic thinkers? Here's an advisor for your program for this prefecture, that prefecture. Just send a Singaporean in there to sit, and they have a very, they can be bossy, but they can also be strategic in how they introduce things, and they can be really good people to get things moving in companies. I'm impressed.
I can call my friend Prime Minister's office, so yeah. And
Here's a middle manager exchange.
oh, she's a middle manager class and strategic thinking people. And yeah, I think that's certainly possible if I contact the right people. And the great thing about Singapore government is that, okay, that this friend in Prime Minister's office, she was in MTI Ministry of Trading and Industry, the Métis counterpart. And she just moved to Prime Minister's office. It's not second, it's just moving from one government to another. And so, you know, the bureaucracy, well-paid bureaucracy, is very flexible in its recruitment process and also the human resource management. So getting to Singapore government and the creative, flexible, pragmatic government is a very good idea. So yeah, what I can think of is, yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, yeah. I'll give you my time. Okay. Sir. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you said decentralization. In what field the decentralization is needed or needed? For example, but on the other hand, China is I don't think China is decentralized. Chinese Communist Party has a big power and control. Probably control many companies and many local municipalities. However, China has a power as a nation, but maybe probably because Japan is was influenced by the USA Reaganomics, and so Japan is getting being decentralized or deregulated. So there is an advantage and disadvantage. So what is the advantage and what is disadvantage of the centralization, and in what field centralization is needed, decentralization is needed, and in what field it's disadvantageous.
Yeah, and the first thing that has to decentralize or move is the ministries. Simply changing their location. If there is magnitude 9 earthquake centered in Tokyo, end of the days, isn't it? Right? So they can go. I mean, they did to Saitama, Newtown, only the Jinjin and the human resource moved, but nobody else. So, that's where they have to take the leadership in that sense. And hopefully people will follow and, yeah, and, and well, the disadvantage, I would like to go for difficulties that, Japan makes money in Tokyo, and people will move outside of Tokyo if they can make money there. So we've got to have that strategy. And I was hoping that after the earthquake, there will be a discussion on changing the entire nationhood, changing the architecture of the country. And Japan was decentralized 150 years ago, and it certainly was. And Tokyo wasn't everything. Kyoto was a cultural center, Osaka was the the economic center, just as New York is the economic center, Washington is the political center. So Japan, there can't be a Asian food or to do so, and what it takes is leadership and decision. And much of the commerce is done electronically, so having good infrastructure and and telecommunication system. And well, by the way, Japanese in IT or ICT isn't good compared to Singapore or compared to other countries. It's just having a good, fast network, and so having a more network society where network is helping industries and education in many ways, and multiplying the benefit. That kind of thing has to happen.
But geographically, counterplane is centralized. Central of Tokyo, central of Japan. So, you mean just capital function should be relocated, or capital of Japan, Tokyo is relocated, should be relocated, or other functions also.
The function should be spread. Having the dye in the Tokyo, we can have a greater. We can afford to have a bigger building than that anywhere else. I don't think it's any point in having. And so, yeah, it should be distributed, not relocated. And having some core places is important. And we pull back Haneda, but Narita is still there, so that might be another chance we have. And so it's not relocation; it's more of a distribution. And
it's a free fund prop.
Huh?
Free fund prop.
Yeah, and risks, diversification of the risk when it comes to natural disaster and so on. I think that's the first thing we should think now, after a year and a half from the disaster. I think.
One point you might think about is just deregulation, so you don't strangle the other prefectures. Tokyo effectively strangles everywhere else, including Osaka. And if those policies were relaxed, not so much, then the market would do it itself. You can simply move out. Right now, if you want to do electronics firm in Okinawa, you can't. You have to do it in Tokyo.
I think there was a question in the back.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm Shibana. I'm from Tokyo University, and I'd like to ask you about your point of view on the Japanese foreign policy. You made maybe two clear points, but I understood that you think that Japanese foreign policy lack some transparency and consistency, but I remember that somehow last year we discussed about the foreign policy in the same class that you mentioned about the Neo-Yoshida doctrine. I remember that you mentioned about the Yoshida doctrine, and I think the Yoshida doctrine is to concentrate on economic foreign policy, while some done thinking about having the original military power. And I would like to ask you about, have you changed your mind about the foreign policy while studying 1 year at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy?
Have a map of the world. I don't. Okay, but I did change. Yeah, I think. Yeah. In everything, Japan has to have more position, and the most basic needs, which is security, that has to be more autonomous, and think about the global imbalance of the economy. United States being the political center and spending tons of money on military, while the money is made across the Pacific, and United States can no longer afford to have a huge a huge military. And United States always want to share the burden with Japan. If you listen to people like Armitage and Nye, they always want more Japanese contribution in this sense. And I don't think that's zero sum with the economic interest and so on. And yeah, so I changed in that sense. And what was the other point? Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Suin, and I know you know me.
We don't.
Oh yeah, I'm Suin Chang. I'm from the University of Tokyo, the Graduate School of Public Policy, and I'm originally from South Korea. And my question is that when people generally think about Japan-Singapore relationship, like you and this gentleman just mentioned that they are more focused on economic issues, but what made you interested in like soft power, especially culture and political relationship? What was the trigger?
First of all, my school, the Going School Public Policy, is half school, half diplomatic institution. The dean was permanent secretary, and the advisor to the dean was a boss in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and foreign minister having a seat somewhere in the research institute. So it's an institute to attract foreign government officials and spread soft power of Singapore. They do it in a very primitive way, let me say. Treat them well, lots of scholarship, free lunch all the time, not most of, quite a bit anyway, and they struggle to keep the attention of people to Singapore, because Singapore is what has grown a lot, but they're peaking, their growth is peaking, so they need a new jump, and they have a sense of threat that if they don't act now, it's never going to happen, or other nations will catch up. The Johor Bahru across the strait might take over the role of Singapore, and they invest a lot. So the foreign ministry or retired diplomat invest a lot in the school, and that's where I took advantage of interviewing these people. So to be honest, I did this because I had a good access to them, and I certainly do not undermine the importance of economy. But however, the economy can be done better by businessmen or other kinds, and it wasn't my specialty. And many of the things I discussed also penetrates business transaction. It's not just making a deal, it's about making a relationship. And that applies to diplomacy, that applies to trade, that applies to studying. So many of the prescription I would give from here, it's quite generic. So in that sense, it covers a wide spectrum. Instead of focusing on or narrowing down on a hard aspect, yeah.
One way in which soft power intellectual hegemony spread is through overseas communities. What I mean is, if you look, for example, at American schools overseas, the same can be said for UK schools, to some extent French ones, and those are a few other European countries. They attract a lot of local students, or students that are not necessarily related to that country. How does the Japanese community in Singapore, which is quite large, the business community, how do you think it contributes to developing Japan's image, ties to Japan, besides the purely business ones of buying, selling, investing?
They are inward-looking. Again, they're quite inward-looking, I would say. And so many of the Japanese people there are just to make money out there, just like any other expats from America or Europe. That is certainly true. And yeah, so there are a lot of Japanese people there, big enough to survive without anybody else. So the Japanese Association is huge, funded by Japan Chamber of Commerce Industry, who are doing very well in the business. So they publish their magazines in Japanese. If you go to AKB48 Cafe, they play the video without the subtitles, so nobody else can actually read it. And so Japanese community is big enough to sustain by themselves, and there's a good access to Japanese resource everywhere they go. So there isn't much incentive for them to engage with locals, and that has to change, I think. And also not just the businessmen, but there are a lot of Japanese institutions in Singapore. For example, there's JNTO, Japanese National Tourism Organization, JICA office. I mentioned JCCI and Japan Foundation, Japanese School of Goals, and JETRO, and JSC, Japanese Science and Technology Organization. And I think I missed a couple more, to be honest. So, and the thing is, they perform their own function, so that they're missing the other opportunity to think otherwise. They stick to their own mission, so they don't have to look around for other things, which is exactly what they do in Tokyo anyway. So I discussed the lack of coordination in Kasumigaseki, but there's a lack of coordination within Japanese agencies and Japanese people community in Singapore. So they just don't know each other very well either. And the new impact I'm trying to have this project that I did. I raised 1000 yen, 10 million yen, for a study trip of my school, and to come to Japan. And Professor Mark gave us a speech in that. So in order to have an influence, we have to do something. In order to, and doing something, a project that connects people, having a bunch of people from different agencies sit down, talk, how are you? That doesn't create relation. We have to do something together. There has to be an overarching project, so that people will see each other seriously with real interest. I think that's what's lacking, and a good candidate for that is actually this agency called CLARE. It's a council of local administrative bodies. So it's a bunch of people from prefectures, city halls coming to Singapore to promote their city, whether it's tourism or industry or education. So there's a overarching board that promotes a region, a prefecture, and so it's not dedicated to one mission or business, so it can be overarching to, so it can cover various interests. So this kind of organization, which might actually goes back to the question of decentralization, the local community doing well, even reaching out to Singapore, that might change the game, I think.
To school, I assume there are a lot of non-Singaporean professors. How many were Japanese, or how many are Japanese PhDs?
None.
None to both?
No.
And say compared to like a non-English speaking country, I mean, were they continental Europeans? I mean, obviously I assume they were Brits, Americans, Canadians, but were they, where did the faculty come from at the Lee Kuan Yew School?
Lots of Canadians. A few Americans and Singaporeans, very good ones, and Indians. India is and Chinese. Yeah, and since it's such a different institution, they do a lot of India-China stuff. They always talk about whether India is going to surpass, or they're going to fight each other, or they do have territorial dispute between themselves. So they have quite a few people from India. really good ones there. So yeah, so India, Singapore, North America, a few Europeans, and non-Japanese. Yeah.
Well, you talked about Yoshida policy before, you changed your idea, I heard that. And following that kind of comment, I'd like to ask you about the security policy. And you interviewed many important people in Singapore, and so you got some comments on defense or security side of the diplomacy. And did you hear any comments by them on Japan's security policy? Because I'm asking you this kind of question because now Americans, the United States, is trying to change their strategy gradually, and it's called rebalancing, so on and so forth. And of course, in South China Sea and East China Sea, issues have been discussed and around. And so I think that they're quite serious, and they accept, they're talking to Americans. I mean, Singaporeans are talking to Americans about possible harboring of the American military vessel in Singapore. And at the same time, they're very careful about China, their relations with China. And so they're really balanced, all kinds of things that will happen. But, sometimes I feel that they must be frustrated with Japan's approach because it's not very clear at all. Did you hear any comments on Japan's?
I didn't talk too much about the security arrangement with Singapore. I mean, Singapore is just too far from Japan, and well, for example, Mr. Malpani said that Japan can have a overall partnership agreement with Japan. With Japan, Singapore can have that, but said I talking about alliance. We don't need alliance; it's too far. And doing exercise in Japan is too expensive. We go to Australia for that anyway. That's how they see Japan in security. However, I asked this one specific question to everyone, but having more Japanese military presence in Southeast Asia, is that going to be welcome? The answer was yes.
Just a small comment that I'd like to make for the Singaporeans. The strategy that they have is very clear because of the national goal and business goal or people's interest is consistent to enhance the charm and the power of the economy. And I think while we have the size and we have the history and we have the weakness of not speaking English, therefore it is just hardly understandable about the one English term of soft power itself. There is a dictionary, soft power, not written. That's a problem of ours. So what do you expect about the future relationship between Singapore and Japan? I know this semantic. The Singaporean sovereign wealth fund is managing the Red China's money, while military balance is their concern too. But they are playing a very good game. So be smart is my ultimate analytical answer of Singaporeans. What do you think?
Singapore, yeah, I mean economic development, having more income, more and more income, even more income. That sounds like national value at the moment. However, the world, Singapore is changing now. They are not straightforward anymore. They're seeking more national values aside from economic prosperity and so on. And since the working party, the opposition party is getting stronger and stronger, and having too many immigrants are considered to be a cause of trouble, and that's one of the reasons opposition party gained quite a bit of support. Well, the main reason comes from real estate market, by the way. But So Singapore is changing now. Singapore is it's coming towards less tangible things, and art, tradition, and identity, which they don't really have. And so Singapore is trying to define what Singapore is in a new way, apart from pragmatism and money. And also, the government can no longer do the Singaporean way of gerrymandering. They probably won't be able to do so. And also the crucial person, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, he's 88 years old, 89 this year. I met him right before his birthday last year. Still doing well, but very old. So after Lee Kuan Yew, that is what we are going to see. And that's where we might see our strengths as very old nation with rich history and and diversity. Japan is diverse, I believe. So this kind of asset we have, which can be located outside of Tokyo, can be in Tokyo. So Singapore will change. Will have to change. And just as other countries are catching up with Singapore, it's gonna have to change its history. So that's where Japan can jump in. We never know what it's going to be. So given the rich asset of Japan, there'll be a game we can play, I believe.
We're time for one short last question. It's short and last. And a short answer or non-answer.
Thank you very much. The question is the system of Singapore. Just as far as I'm concerned, the Singapore is very much so-called, we just mentioned about the EU system is very much autocratic in a sense. And people like you, intelligent and Singaporean people get money with that. And the government promotes such kind of system. Today's main point is the soft power of Japanese. And I'm Japanese, that's the reason why my egalitarianism in Japan. But Singapore is very much similar to that of the United States, and that's the reason why Japanese corporation is allowed to have land in Singapore, especially not only use but also think that. But my question is that the Japanese soft power, it seems to me that include such kind of egalitarianism as well, and something like not only sushi but also the world is something like that. It's not the Japanese. How after the Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore to maintain such kind of system? Thank you.
Is the system they have now?
I don't think so. They're going to have to be able to handle more political voices and more transparency. The government is not very transparent, I can say. And although they are open discussion, but they are good at avoiding questions as well. So more transparency, more voices, diversity, and still having a core Singaporean value. That's going to be the struggle. And I think that's essential to have another national consensus to the next chapter of Singapore. Well, it's nice to be back in Japan, but this is not what I expected. Japanese people tend to be quiet, but well, I really appreciate having a lot of good discussion, and so I don't have to be Singapore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We tried.